this misinformation. Do you think this is a time to put falsehoods aside, like the idea that FEMA funds are being redirected to migrants, which is just not true?
Well, it is true that FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security have been spending billions of dollars on migrants.
Apparently pointing out the documented evidence that shows that the Department of Homeland Security spent upwards to $1 billion to relocate illegal immigrants in this country all over the nation, give them shelter, give them benefits, give them health care, give them food. If you point that out and at the same time point out the fact that the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, says now that they don't have enough money for hurricane relief to make it through the hurricane season. If you point out those facts, you're peddling in misinformation. Let me repeat that. If you point out the facts about the FEMA budget and where the money has been spent and the fact they don't have any money for hurricane relief, you're guilty of misinformation. This, according to the White House, the Biden administration, and of course, all of their faithful, loyal, loving journalists who run Sunday shows like this woman, Kristen Welker. Kristen Welker had Senator Tom Cotton on and wanted to talk about misinformation, but she made the mistake of giving this FEMA talking point as evidence of the misinformation. She made the mistake of laying out the FEMA narrative and saying, but of course, that's not true. And well, the mistake she made was saying that to Tom Cotton.
My broader question to you, I think, is about this misinformation. Do you think this is a time to put falsehoods aside, like the idea that FEMA funds are being redirected to migrants, which is just not true?
Well, it is true that FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security have been spending billions of dollars on migrants. Now, I understand some people say they're separate funds, but we just passed a short-term spending bill. It's very common for the administration to come and ask for permission to move money between funds, especially to prepare for emergencies. And second, I would note that this administration seems to have no problem finding money when they want to spend it on their priorities. When they need hundreds of billions of dollars to pay off student loans for graduate students in gender studies programs, they somehow find it. When it's trying to get helicopters to deliver food and water and cellular service and life-saving medicine into these mountain valleys, they somehow can't seem to find the money.
Yeah, did you hear how Kristen Welker was trying to jump in there and interrupt him because it didn't quite go the way she was expecting? I think she thinks her job is to parrot the White House talking points whenever possible and to say that conservatives are lying about things. But where's the lie? Thank you, Tom Cotton. The guy is absolutely ferocious lately. He's been absolutely the best, frankly, I think, surrogate for the Trump campaign when he does these appearances. Literally, where is the lie? FEMA spent this much money on illegal immigration, which by definition is not an emergency. It's not something FEMA is supposed to do, right? You can make the argument that it should come from, ICE or from Border Patrol or from Health and Human Services, or maybe I've got an idea. I mean, I know this is going to be outrageous and I'm really thinking outside the box, but maybe, just maybe, if you've got a crisis of people coming to our border and crossing all across Mexico from Central America and South America, or flying in from Haiti or from China or from God knows hundreds of countries around the world and creating a humanitarian crisis on our border, maybe you shouldn't all let them in. And maybe it's not our problem to deal with. And maybe it shouldn't be our tax dollars that solves this problem. Maybe if you keep the border closed, people won't be coming here and it won't be an emergency that we have to deal with. That's just a thought. But in the meantime, if you are going to let them in, maybe it shouldn't be the money that's been reserved for hurricane relief and other natural disasters that actually fixes this problem that you've created. So Tom Cotton makes a great point. This is not misinformation. It is 100% true that they've spent money on that, budgeted money for the Department of Homeland Security. And this administration never wavers at the opportunity to ask for more money for anything. And he makes a great point about the student loan thing. They didn't have any money allocated to pay back people's student loans, but they figured out a way, didn't they? But instead, Alejandro Mayorkas is there hat in hand saying, we got no more money. We got to, we got to spend all our FEMA money on this other stuff. We got no more. You got to give us more money. And the only response from Kristen Welker is, well, they're lying. This is misinformation. I'm old enough to remember misinformation during a hurricane. I'm old enough to remember journalists claiming that there was cannibalism going on in the Superdome. because George Bush was racist or something. That was basically the overall narrative, that it's okay for Black people in New Orleans to die. And there was rampant crime, violence, and even people eating dead bodies. Look it up. That was literally one of the stories that was flying around during Hurricane Katrina. And the entire narrative from the mainstream corporate propaganda press at that time, because we had a Republican in the Oval Office, was that Hurricane Katrina is horrible and FEMA's not doing anything because it's Black people who are dying. That was the entirety of the narrative. It took years for the truth to come out about Hurricane Katrina. The FEMA actually responded in a pretty amazing way, much quicker than we're seeing right now in North Carolina, much quicker. George Bush was there on the ground much sooner than George Biden or Kamala Harris was in North Carolina or Georgia. And if there was any delay and problem at the beginning of Hurricane Katrina, it was squarely on the shoulders of Ray Nagin, the mayor, Democrat mayor of New Orleans, and the Democrat governor of Louisiana, who didn't even ask for FEMA assistance at the beginning of the crisis. So I'm sorry. You want to start talking about misinformation in the wake of a hurricane. They're saying that these men who were down there on the ground saying FEMA's keeping us from being able to help our neighbors, FEMA's getting in the way of us giving private assistance, they're not letting us fly drones. Pete Buttigieg put out a video saying don't fly drones over the storm damage because you're hampering air traffic. There's no air traffic to speak of there right now because nobody's going in to try to rescue anyone at any sort of rapid pace. They don't like that the drones, low-flying drones, are in there assessing the damage and trying to find victims because they're in the process of damage control. Not hurricane damage control, political damage control. They don't want the drones flying because the videos that the drones are taking are then going viral because the American people are able to see on social media exactly how bad things are, and they don't want you to see it. And then they call it misinformation. They're calling actual facts and actual information misinformation. But if Kristen Welker really wants to focus on lies right now in the news and misinformation being thrown out there by political figures, maybe she should check this woman out. She might look familiar to you. At a rally in Flint, Michigan, where she's desperate for votes from people who live or die on the automotive industry, she made a whopper of a lie.
And Michigan, let us be clear, contrary to what my opponent is suggesting, I will never tell you what kind of car you have to drive. But here's what I will do. I will invest in communities like Flint. Which helped build the auto industry and the UAW. We will retool existing factories, hire locally, and work with unions to create good-paying jobs, including jobs that do not require a college degree. Because we understand a college degree is not the only measure of whether a worker has skills and experience to get the job done.
Oh, boy. Seriously, 4 years of that voice. You ready for it? That last bit about college degrees is a great idea. Too bad Donald Trump came up with it first. He's been campaigning on that for years. And it's about time Democrats jumped on board with it. But this idea that, contrary to what my opponent says, I will never tell you what kind of car you need to buy. And of course, this is pandering to the auto workers there and people who live and die on the auto industry because this entire administration has been pushing for electric vehicle mandates. It's all they talk about until it's time to get votes in Michigan. In fact, the narrative up until about 6 months ago, specific to Michigan voters, was we're reinventing the auto industry. Oh, you're going to keep your jobs. Electric cars are going to be just as labor intensive to build and manufacture as internal combustion engines. So we're not going to ruin the automotive industry, and we're not going to take away your jobs. You're just going to transfer from working on an internal combustion engine car to an EV car. The problem is they had no idea what they were talking about. Two big problems with that. Number one, it is really hard to convert an existing automotive plant from making internal combustion engines to making EVs. So the auto industry is really reluctant to do it unless they're getting free money from the Biden administration, which they did give them in the whole Inflation Reduction Act thing, which is really the Green New Deal Act. But there's no more money left for that. But it was all subsidized, number one. And number two, and probably the most important thing that they didn't understand about the automotive industry, is that you don't want to buy electric vehicles. I mean, if you do want to buy an electric vehicle, you don't want to buy the heavily subsidized Ford or GM or Chevy or Chrysler car that hasn't been as properly engineered because they're trying to retrofit EV technology into an existing internal combustion design and just saying, well, the government gave us money, so stick a battery in there and it'll be fine. Have you driven one of those? Have you driven a Chevy Volt? No. If you want to buy an electric vehicle, you're going to buy the car that was designed from the ground up to be an electric vehicle. You're going to buy a Tesla, which they hate because they're not made in Michigan and they're not made by union workers. So they hate Elon Musk. They hate Tesla, which is actually a successful electronic vehicle, which is the irony of it all. But the beginning part of it is the most important part. What did she claim here?
And Michigan, let us be clear. Contrary to what my opponent is suggesting, I will never tell you what kind of car you have to drive.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Did you notice the tepid response from the people in the room there in Flint, Michigan? Because they know the truth. They know that was bull. And back to Senator Tom Cotton with the truth bomb. He saw that and then posted on X, Kamala Harris is lying. Here is her bill to ban all gas cars. She made it a top priority in the Senate, being the number one sponsor. She'll say anything to get elected, and that is correct. This is from when she was a senator. To amend the Clean Air Act to create a national zero-emission vehicle standard and for other purposes. She signed on to the bill. How do you create a zero-emission standard? How do you have zero emissions? Well, there's no such thing as a zero-emission internal combustion engine. If you make it the federal law that you have zero emission standards, which Kamala Harris proposed in the Senate, it means you are literally telling people what kind of car they're allowed to drive. She's lying. She's lying. Again, one other thing happened at that rally in Flint that we have to draw attention to. Most of Kamala Harris' lies are all scripted. We spent a little time on her interview earlier in the day on 60 Minutes. And if you're seeing this clip right now as not part of our full show, look for that clip because you've got to see what her eyes do when she lies because it's remarkable. It's such a tell. I want to play poker with Kamala Harris so that I can tell when she's bluffing because she sends out Morse code with her eyelids. But most of her lies, unlike that off-the-cuff interview in 60 Minutes, most of them are written out and scripted for her on her teleprompter. I have to give credit where it's due. She, like Barack Obama before her, is very good at reading her scripted, rehearsed lines that are laid out for her on her teleprompter. She can even be charming sometimes. She throws on some fake phony accents and she sort of ingratiates herself to whatever audience she's talking to. You'll see it. She's about to do it here. Look at that winning smile. And she's really good at performing her part, reading her lines, and delivering her, monologue for the televised audience. She's an actress. She's playing the part of a woman who wants to be president. The only problem is when she has a malfunction on the teleprompter and the script isn't right there for her to read her lines, she's not so good at improvisation. She's not so good at, unlike Barack Obama and Bill Clinton before them, she can't just, sort of her way through it. Because here's the problem when you change your policies year after year after year, when you're delivering campaign messages that are 180 different than everything you stood for 5 years ago, which was completely different from everything you stood for 5 years before that when you ran for the Senate. when you don't actually have any sort of moral compass or firm foundation of principles and values and beliefs that you stand for, other than the furtherance of your own political identity, politics, DEI, political career, then when pressed to actually express yourself in front of an audience, you're not sure what you're supposed to say. And that's what happened when her teleprompter went down. Take a look at this and let's see if we can identify the very moment when her teleprompter gets stuck. I think if you look closely, you might be able to figure it out.
Remember his number, 32. Today we got 32 days until the election. So 32 days. 32 days. Okay, we got some business to do. All right. 32 days. And we know we will do it. And this is going to be a very tight race until the very end. This is going to be a very tight race until the very end. We are the underdog, and we know we have some hard work ahead.
I love that they're the incumbent. They're flying around on Air Force One and government planes, but they're the underdog. Let's not forget it. I think you may have seen it. And by the way, she's referring to Irvin Magic Johnson, who was number 32, who was from Flint, Michigan, played for Michigan State, and then, of course, the Lakers. And I'll be honest with you, as a Michigan man who ended up moving to Los Angeles the year after Magic Johnson moved to Los Angeles when I was a kid, and I grew up loving Showtime. It breaks my heart that Magic is all in for this vacuous loser. I wish he would just stay out of politics completely. That said, let's watch this together because it's cringe, it's painful, and it's glorious because this is who she is. This is truly who she is. She starts trying to do this semi-urban Detroit accent too, right? At the beginning when she's like having fun because she knows she's got her script to work off of. So number 32, Irvin Magic Johnson.
Remember his number, 32. Today we got 32 days until the election.
So now she looks up at the teleprompter and she sees that it's not scrolling. She's already said the 32 days line, and now it should start scrolling, but it's not scrolling. So now watch her eyes as she keeps looking at the panels and waiting for it to move, and she realizes it's not going to move.
So 32 days. 32 days. Okay, we got some business to do.
Now she's trying to put the charm offensive on because she's panicking now. And she's like, oh, I know. I'll just use the power of my personality to push through this until they get it fixed. So, all right, now we got some business to do. So she's trying the accent again. But within 20 seconds, she's going to realize that she can't sustain that. And you're going to hear how the voice changes and she has to drop the accent because it's all out panic mode with flop sweats.
All right. 32 days. And we know we will do it. And this is going to be a very tight race until the very end.
All right. So you notice how the accent's gone now. None of this. We got some business to do. And you remember his number 32, right? And that's gone. Because she's in panic mode now. She's got to go to her comfort place. So suddenly, instead of the Southern, instead of the urban, instead of the French, instead of all the other accents she puts on, she slips back to her natural Canadian voice with a tinge of Quebecois, I suppose. But it's that flat, nasally. I mean, she's almost going to say, I'm sorry, but we can't win the Stanley Cup because we're Canadian. You realize that, right? Everyone thinks, she's Californian. No, she moved out of California when she was like still in elementary school. You know this, right? It's amazing how her history, it's like this woman is such a vacuous non-entity that she's like a month away from being president. God help us all. And people don't even realize that her formative years of growing up, she wasn't even in this country. She was Canadian. She was in Quebec. That's where her mother got a job in Montreal. She lived in the Tony middle-class suburbs of Montreal. So that accent, if you're trying to place it, is not Northern California. It's not Berkeley. It's Quebec. It's Canadian. So that's where she lands. You realize that, right? She moved out, I think it was 7, 8, 9 years old. She was still in elementary school, and she lived there through high school. Think about that. Have we ever elected a president who spent that many of her formative childhood years? Well, her. We've never elected any president with a her. But you guys know that, right? That she's Canadian. She's Canadian. I mean, she was born in America. But Canada had more to do with her upbringing and influencing her life as she grew up and became a young adult than California ever did. And then she moved to DC to go to Howard University, right from Quebec. All right, so now you can hear the Canadian accent because now she's panicked about the teleprompter. So she starts, riffing.
We will do it.
It's that flat, nasally Canadian thing, right? It's like, see, I'm from Detroit originally, so we like making fun of Canadians. Yeah, I mean, Canada was good for crossing the bridge and being able to get beer when you were 18. Not me. I had already moved out of there, but my brothers tell me that that's what they would do. There were other things to do in Windsor, Ontario as well, but again, I would never mention such things.
And this is going to be a very tight race until the very end. This is going to be a very tight race until the very end. We are the underdog, and we know we have some hard work ahead.
All right, so that's what happens when Kamala Harris's teleprompter goes out. She just keeps repeating the same thing over and over again, and none of it makes any sense. When it is working, she's lying, like bald-faced lies, as everyone from that campaign is prone to do. When the teleprompter doesn't work, she is a blithering fool. And I ask you, as you see that, you want her facing down Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or Iran in working out a nuclear agreement, or just trying to face them down? The more you see of this is why they protect her. This is why they keep her out of view, because the more you see her, you realize how terrifying it is to think of her in the Oval Office.